we're having dinner at my mother's house, and then suddenly we feel sort of the ground shaking, because most people live in buildings in Beirut, so we sort of feel the ground shaking. We're like, maybe it's an earthquake, because Lebanon, Turkey, and all that area is in an earthquake zone. And then suddenly, like, we hear like a loud explosion.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of HUMED. I'm Dr. David Spiro. I'm incredibly delighted and honored to have Dr. Khalil Diab with us today. He is an associate professor at the GW School of Medicine, and his training is as a pulmonologist and critical care physician. In pediatrics, we usually don't have those combos-ish, and I know in adult medicine that's very common. And so he's a very specialized physician that actually not only understands lung physiology, but also takes care of the sickest of the sick adults, which is just incredibly impressive. And we met through a colleague that introduced us, as he is the host of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And we have similar numbers of subscribers, and this is an incredible opportunity to interview the host of another well-subscribed podcast. And Khalil, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, David, thank you for inviting me. And now it's a race to who's going to have the highest number of subscribers.
You know, it's one of these things, I think, in the podcast world I'm learning is we're all friends. I mean, right. There's so many people who I just read a statistic that over 200 million Americans are listening to podcasts at least once or twice a week. So it is exploding. And I think that we're behind in medicine. So I'm hoping that through storytelling in this realm that we can just continue to peel open and unveil the human side of medicine. And I've been really intrigued about your past, not only as a podcast host and a physician, but some of the work that you've done in Lebanon, and which I've never been. I want to visit, but I know it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
It is a beautiful country.
And on multiple levels, with beautiful people that I've met. And I really would love to start off with your story.
Yeah. So, as I mean, you, David, you've got a great podcast, and I've listened to a lot of the stories that you've had. And the story I'm going to talk about is, so I was here in the U.S. I trained here and did my fellowship in Indianapolis, stayed there for a while, but always in the back of my mind, I wanted to move back to Lebanon. And finally, the stars aligned for me and my wife, and we decided to move back there. In 2018, we got jobs at, she at the American University of Beirut, I got a job at the Lebanese American University, and we moved back there in 2018 with our kids. And they went to school there, and I can say, I mean, it was a great experience going back. Just treating the patients in your original home country is always nice. Just having a different relationship with the patients and a different way of practicing medicine is also eye-opening, and also like being cognizant about the costs of drugs and the cost of the things that you do is also eye-opening. But as we were there, as everybody knows, maybe back in 2019, the revolution started, and so we had to deal with that because of the financial collapse in the country. And then after the revolution, I dealt with COVID-19 and its impacts on the country at the time, especially during the period when there was a complete collapse of the currency at that point in time. And my story today, I'm going to discuss the story of what happened on August 4 of 2020, when I was still working in Lebanon at the time. And I don't know if people know or don't know what happened that day, but it was, we were just, I'd finished work. We were having dinner at my mother's house, and then suddenly we feel sort of the ground shaking, because most people live in buildings in Beirut, so we sort of feel the ground shaking. We're like, maybe it's an earthquake, because Lebanon, Turkey, and all that area is in an earthquake zone. And then suddenly, like, we hear like a loud explosion, and I thought this happened in the neighborhood where we were, and everybody apparently that day thought that same thing. And so quickly, probably in the next like 10, 15 minutes or less, even like 5 minutes, maybe, I don't know, time, you know, have time, like you don't remember the time at that when these things happen. Quickly, we learned that this was an explosion at the port of Beirut, and it was one of the biggest actually non-nuclear explosions to happen we discovered later, due to ammonium nitrate exploding there. But then quickly the CMO of our hospital was like, we need all hands on deck right now, sent a message out, and we all ran to the hospital to help. It was everybody, like you can name it, you find it: ENT physicians, neurosurgeons, GI physicians, everybody was over there. And we get to the hospital. Our hospital was in an area of Beirut called Ashrafieh, which is sort of on the east side of the port, and like above the port. So I get to the hospital, like there's a lot of destruction actually in the hospital, and patients are arriving to the ER. Like you see blood, you see people who had a lot of cuts, bruises, stuff like that. And that's initially what we started doing. But then quickly we figured out, these are not the priority patients, because we were getting a lot of other patients who had head injuries, and probably you are an ER physician, David, and so we were seeing a lot of the owl's eyes, and people who were unconscious, stuff like that. And so we then decided quickly, we're like, no, it's a mass trauma event. We're just going to deal first with the most acute and the most high risk and critical situations. And so we ended up like intubating a lot of the patients. We ran out of ventilators, artificial respirators. So we had to have the respiratory therapists potentially just squeeze the tubes. And then, like you never think about it, but in a mass trauma situation, typically when you have a trauma, like you say, this is whatever patient, something, you don't know the name and you put it, but you have one or two patients who are in the trauma. But here you had like, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 patients unnamed. So you had to have like trauma 1, trauma 2, name them different names. And then we had to send the residents down to try to figure out the CTs for each of these patients, because we didn't have any of the names. We didn't have contacts for their family members. And so it was a very eye-opening experience in terms of how many patients we saw that night. I think all the physicians working together to try to make it work. Obviously, you had a lot of work for the neurosurgeons, a lot of work for the ENT surgeons, because of a lot of facial fractures that happens. Because a lot of the buildings in Beirut it's not like the US where most of them are made of, let's say, wood or drywall and stuff like that. It's more they're made of, it's glass and potentially stone and stuff like that. So basically, a lot of people had injuries because of glass, like just shattering everywhere and leading to a lot of the injuries that happened, or like ceilings collapsing on people and stuff like that. So these were the injuries that we saw that night. But it was, you just spent hours and hours working, and then you just don't remember, the time until finally my wife had taken the kids up to the mountains to her parents above Beirut. And then I went with my surgeon friend. Like afterwards, it was very surreal, because you're driving from Beirut, you're like in all that scene, and suddenly you're up in the mountains. And then once you get up there, you're looking down and you see like this cloud of smoke above the city, and you're like, I was just down there, and you don't even know what you were breathing that day. It was just very surreal when you were all the way up there. But I think it was a very eye-opening experience. I never imagined that I would be in a mass trauma event like this before.
And so when you described, I remember it was a chemical factory explosion. ammonium nitrate. Was there any chemical burns and reactions to breathing in the chemicals after this explosion, or was it mostly physical trauma from the explosion itself?
Yeah, it was mostly physical trauma. It was more it's like an ammonium nitrate facility at the port that exploded. And there's a lot of people who live around the port. But most of the trauma that we saw was mostly like physical trauma from uh, uh, glass and from ceilings and other things collapsing on people. That was most of what we saw.
So I want to get back to the move because I'm fascinated about multiple aspects of your story. You grew up in Lebanon, and then you ended up training here in the U.S., where we have many people from many countries who have trained. My neighbor across the street is from India and is also a pulmonologist, critical care physician, and we're incredibly fortunate to have him here. And he's staying here. He didn't move back to India, but you actually chose to move your family after your training and after spending a couple of years here. As a pediatrician and as a father myself, what ages were your children at that time in 2018 when you decided to move?
They were 6 and 5.5, 6 and 8, basically.
And so at that point, they've spent most of their life. Is this fair? They spent most of their life is in the U.S.?
Right, they had been born in the U.S., spent most of their life, but they used to visit Lebanon every summer and sometimes over the holidays, over Christmas and New Year's.
So was there a cultural shock for them in some ways? I mean, children are malleable, but I'm
Right.
just wondering what the transition was like through the eyes of a child. They're in elementary school, and they're just figuring out sort of the way things are, and then they're transplanted to a completely different culture halfway around the world. Like, what was that about?
Yeah, it was surprising. I mean, kids are malleable, but
Mhm.
yes, there was a sort of a cultural shock initially, especially when they were interacting with kids who were born and raised in Lebanon. But Lebanon is a very, I mean, there's so many people in the country who are expats, right? They leave, it's like us, they come back and stuff like that. So a lot of the kids in their classes actually were people who were in the US before or whose parents worked for the United Nations or the European Union and stuff like that. So these were mostly they were quickly made friends with these kids who had like sort of similar backgrounds. And till now, I think they are friends more with these kids than with the kids who were sort of born in Lebanon and raised in Lebanon because there was a sort of a cultural shock from that standpoint.
Hmm. And so, what was it like for you coming back now? You left Lebanon as finishing medical school, and now you're coming back as a trained pulmonologist and critical care physician. What are the different healthcare systems like in terms of, or the difference between the Lebanese healthcare system and the U.S. healthcare system? I imagine it's significant.
Yeah, it is significantly different. I think Lebanon, as in other countries, it's sort of a private insurance marketplace and private hospitals, but then you've got the government hospitals. I think the difference is like if you're in a private hospital, which we were working at, university hospitals that were private, uh, the ERs, and you're an ER physician, they typically take in, like if you get somebody with a heart attack, like a acute heart attack, an acute stroke, you take all these people in. But if you get somebody in who does not have an emergent situation, typically they have to go to the hospital where their insurance is accepted, or if they're government hospital, they have to go to the government hospital. They won't admit them to the private hospitals. That's the difference in the US. I think anybody who ends up in your ER, whether you're a community hospital, an academic hospital, or a county hospital, you have to accept them. And that's not the case over there. So that's one difference I would say that is major. And I think the other major difference, just in Lebanon, is a smaller country like other small countries. So basically, everybody knows everybody. So basically, you're sitting in clinic, you get a patient, they see you, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, your aunt says hi. We know her, and she was our neighbor somewhere, or your friend so and so says hi," stuff like that. So it's like everybody knows everybody, so you can't hide. I guess it's more of a social. You have like a social link to your patients that I think sometimes in the U.S. you don't have that exact social link because it's just a bigger country and people don't know each other as much just because of the number of people in the country.
You know, it's interesting. You went. I've never lived in Lebanon. I've never really been to the Middle East. I've been to Turkey, but that's the closest I've ever been to Istanbul. And you had said that there was this explosion on August 4th, 2020, and you feel the ground shaking underneath you and you hear an explosion, and you said you thought maybe it was an earthquake or there's something about an earthquake versus a chemical explosion. But I also imagine there may have been some people thinking it was a bomb, that maybe Lebanon was under attack. And I'm wondering if that came across your mind, that maybe it was some sort of warfare-like event, whether it was a bomb from Israel or some terrorist experience. You had also just experienced a change of government and a lot of instability in the country around that time. So I'm wondering if that came across your mind as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing that came across my mind was this like an assassination attempt of someone like who belongs to one political party in a neighborhood, because you felt the ground shake. You felt as if the explosion happened in your neighborhood when it happened elsewhere. That was the first thing. But other people who were living up in the mountains say that the first thing that came to their mind was like an attack on the port that potentially led to this explosion, because they heard that sound of like as if it's a sound of planes. But I think it was just the sound of the ammonium nitrate exploding that created that sound. But initially, people thought this was the sound of like planes attacking and bombing that area of the port.
So, what was it like being there when there is, you know, we have for the last 250 years, for the most part, we've had pretty smooth transitions of government in the United States in the way that we've set up the democracy here. And what is it like being in a place working as a physician where there is instability in that regard? And then you also are in the context of being neighbors to Israel, where there's war or skirmishes happening on the southern border of Lebanon. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. But that's sort of an ongoing stress with what's happening. And what was it? What is the interface like living as a physician and not as a physician, as a human being, as a dad and a husband, and you're raising a family in the context of these stressors?
Yeah, I think it's so basically people adapt, right? Like you are living there. When the revolution started, like there was a lot of like occasional road closures, let's say, people like demonstrating, whatever. And then, because I think it was also run by some political parties at the time, so they would like close the road. You'd be going to work. So I started going to work I used to walk my daughter. She used to go to the American Community School, which is across the Mediterranean next to AUB, and then take an Uber just because I wanted to talk to the Uber drivers and ask them like about the economy, what their thoughts are, stuff like that. And then also it helped me with the Uber. It helped me because if the road is closed, Beirut's small. You get down, you walk. You're like, oh yeah, closed road. I just walk, get to work. But it's funny how people get used to instability. So even we used to go even to the revolution area, like in downtown Beirut, it was a party. Like you go at night, people are like, there's concerts, there's whatever. And you just adapt to that. But then more instability happens, such as like another party attacking the demonstrations or whatever, stuff like that. But I think you have these stressors in your mind, but they're underlying, and you start like getting used to it. And I remember I had some like friends living in the US. They'd be like, hey, should we, what do you think? Should we visit over Christmas? Is it safe? And I'd be like, I'm living here. I mean, it's fine to us, like life is normal. So I think you should visit. So it's like, I think you just get used to the instability. And even I think your kids sort of get used to it too. So it becomes like sort of a normal thing for you. And I think about it like, I mean, I grew up in the country during the war, and we used to go to school during the war, or go. I mean, we used to like it. Sometimes you go to the basement when there's a war, and you have all the neighbors. Like imagine, like you have all your neighbors visiting you at the same time, and you're playing board games or playing soccer with them and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, it's fun. Like let's go down to the basement and play it all together. So I think you just get used to it. I think the mind just gets used to anything. Human mind can get used to anything.
Interesting. And so, what different things do you see from a medical standpoint, or is it about the same from critical care medicine in the U.S. in terms of disease states? Are you seeing things there that you don't see here, or is the medicine from your standpoint as a pulmonologist and a critical care doc, is it radically different, or are you dealing with pretty much the same things? You had mentioned heart attacks and strokes, which exists everywhere in the U.S., but are there certain diseases or certain things that if you're in Lebanon, you're just thinking about differently than if you were practicing in the U.S.?
Right. So the practice sort of, because my wife and I worked because in Lebanon also you have like French hospitals, American hospitals, stuff like that. So we sort of worked in American hospitals, which followed the American system. So there is some comparison to the U.S., but I mean, I think disease. I'll tell you, these states, like stuff like we see there that we don't see here, are like, for example, brucellosis from like cheeses, and it can cause like some neurologic manifestations. While here in the U.S. you see Lyme disease, right? Like it can cause like neurologic manifestations. That's something to think about. Familial Mediterranean fever. That we don't see as much here, except for people of Mediterranean descent. So that's another thing that you have to think about. Food poisoning. Food poisoning is another thing that we don't see as much here, but over there, due to electricity issues and stuff like that, sometimes when you eat at restaurants, you tend to see that. Some worm diseases, right? For example, amoeba and the liver. Like you don't see it here, you see it over there. These are some of the things. But I think the other thing that was more eye-opening to me is over there you have to think about, because insurance typically doesn't pay for everything. It depends. And the hospitals sometimes charge over insurance or whatever. So let's say I'm doing an endobronchial ultrasound or a procedure to stage lung cancer on a patient. Sometimes the patient has to pay for the needle. Like the insurance would pay for their anesthesia or whatever, but they don't pay for the needle. So you have to think about the pricing of the needle, how much it is. You have to think about, I'm going to try to use one needle because if it whatever bends, I don't want to use another one because I don't want to charge the patient for another needle. Or if you're doing an indwelling pleural catheter drain, like a cancerous fluid collection around the lungs, then you contact the company that's cheapest. Like we contacted a UK-based company because they had cheaper supplies than, let's say, one of the US-based companies. So you have to think about these things, which I think here in the US, you just do whatever is available to you and you don't think about the cost of what you're using.
So, as I said, my next door neighbor and many folks that I know, hundreds of people, we've very fortunate in the US to have folks from all over the world come and train. And from my experience, the majority of whom end up staying here in the US. And you ended up going back for a while. So I want to get to sort of what was your calculus? What were you thinking about, and in terms of the why? Why did you decide to move back? You've trained, you have kids here, you're established. You mentioned you were in Indianapolis for a while.
Yeah.
It's a big move to move a family across from Virginia to California, let alone you're packing up and you're going to a different country, and it's your home country, but still it's a big move. What inspired you to do that?
Yeah.
What were you thinking about?
Exactly. So for me, it was more like I had this nostalgia. Like, sometimes when people, and it's actually written about a lot about like when people move from place to place, I think you always have nostalgia to the place that you grew up, like when you're between 10 and 20 years of age. And you're always like, have these good thoughts about that place. And so I had that nostalgia to that I really wanted to move back and see how it is to live there, and I had it in my mind. And then also I had it in my mind that I wanted like my kids to potentially uh, get a taste of like how it is to get raised in a place where you don't have everything. It's like you don't have abundance, right? Just to see like how it is to be raised in a place like that and how people live uh, in places like that. I also wanted them like over there, like how the Mediterranean warmth, like you go to these big family lunches, like big dinners with family and stuff like that, and it's like people are in your face all the time. So I wanted them to experience that and have that opportunity. I think so. That's part of the reason why that we made that decision. And I know, obviously, it was a very difficult decision because change is hard, especially when you've been in a place for a long time and you have not changed for a while. I think always your mind tells you, all our minds are like that. You've got some certain anxiety, right? Like I'm going to the unknown. I'm currently in the known. I'm going to the unknown, and that was part of it. And the other part of it, I think, was I'm always someone who is sort of like looking for new things. And we were in Indianapolis for a while, so I started to get into the routine, and I didn't like the routine I was into. I thought it was starting to get me a bit bored. So I think that was part of the other reason that made me do. So as I said, it was back in 2018, and at the time the stars aligned. Like my wife got a job at the American University of Beirut. She's a pediatric endocrinologist, and he needed someone at that time. And then I got a job at the Lebanese American University. And it's rare to get such good jobs there because also with these jobs over there, you're treated like an expat. So basically, you get a subsidy on your housing. Your kids go to private schools for free. And you basically get like a 401k, a 403b, basically. And so you get a lot of the benefits, and you enjoy the benefits of being an expat while you're living in your sort of home country. So I think all the stars aligned at the same time. And that's why we decided to do that move at that time. Right. Yes. No, they didn't spend that much. They spent only 3 years in Lebanon, so not that much. Yeah. So yeah. So basically, because we moved back here back in 2020, end of 2020, basically. So yeah, and the thing with the move was at the time just that the continuous instability in the country, and then the explosion was like sort of the last straw because my kids were really scared at the time from the explosion. I was like, me and wife were like, we don't want to like have them experience like the childhood that we had, just a continuous period of instability. And I have family in DC, and so there was an opening in DC. I got the job at GW, and I was like, and me and my wife discussed it. We're like, it's not going to happen all the time that you're going to get a good job in DC. We've got family there. We're going to move back to the US. We'd rather move to a place where I've got like cousins, stuff like that. And so that's why we're like, let's do it. It's unstable, and we should probably just do it just because we got to move back to a good place and where we have family members, we got jobs and stuff like that. And so that's why we decided to do the move. Yeah, so basically, that was after we moved back is when I started it because when we moved there, I decided to sort of start at the time there was the time of blogging and stuff like that. So I decided to start a blog. It's what's called Expat MD in Lebanon at the time, and it was like about funny stories that happened over there because a lot of funny stuff like happens. I mean, I don't know if I go into it now or not, but then when we moved back here, I was like, I'm not gonna have these funny things happened to me all the time. So I was out on a run, and I was like, what should I do? And at the time, I mean, in Lebanon, podcasting was starting to flourish, and but English-based podcasting was not as common. It was more like Lebanese talk and stuff like that. And but there was one podcast that was called the Lebanese Politics podcast that was documenting the political situation in the country at the time, and it was in English. And I was like, maybe I should start the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. Initially, I wanted to do it to document like what my colleagues were going through back home during the revolution and the financial collapse and after the explosion and the effects of that on mental health and stuff like that. And that's why I decided to start it back in I think it was early 2021 when I started it. I mean, tell you the truth, it's a great experience because I mean, and that's what I would tell people is don't like, and probably you would tell the same thing is, I did it because I felt it was like something that made me do something outside the box. It made me like meet a lot of people, and I liked it just documenting stories of what people are doing and what people who were successful doing and maybe not so successful doing too at the same time. I didn't. I don't start it because I want to make money out of it or because it's. I want to get subscribers. I just started it because it just made me feel good about myself, about just documenting stories, and so I've met a lot of people along the way, and it's been great because I mean I've been able to not only meet people but also connect people sometimes with each other. Like people would contact me, they're like somebody I did a podcast with would be like, "Hey, we need a speaker regarding, let's say, AI for our NGO," and then I would be like, "Oh yeah, I did a podcast with this guy working in this company in Boston. Let me connect you together." And actually, this is one story where I connected a physician who was in an NGO in Lebanon with a person who worked in AI at Philips, and so he went back and did a talk for them. So it was like, yeah. So these are things that I like about it. Yeah, I think so, for sure. I think it's given a voice. One, it's given the voice to a lot of people, because before it was like, to be able to have a voice, you had to be like in the media, right? Like, or a politician or something like that, where people would listen to you and you'd be invited to CBS or ABC or CNN, stuff like that. But now anybody can potentially tell their story or decide to be their own media person, and create their own story and their own podcast. Uh, so which is a great thing, I think. But at the same time, as you were saying, I think what we need to try to dig into is where it's good information and where there is misinformation, because also it could be used and funded to potentially provide a lot of misinformation. And people, I mean, that's a downside and the upside, right, of social media. Is one, when you're got YouTube, social media, you are able to have your voice heard everywhere. But at the same time, also it has algorithms and stuff like that, and then you tend to listen to only the things that go with your thinking. So basically, and that's why I think people are turning more into. It's becoming very, things are becoming very like one-sided, I would say, or like people are like, that's why there's a lot of divisions, right? Because people just think about one thing and the other people think about the other thing, and nobody listens to anything in the middle anymore. It's more like, and that's where I think podcasting can help too, by having people who have the middle ground, tell their story, and tell very important things, that otherwise would not be heard if you did not have the forums to do that in the first place. Oh, Yeah, that's a good question. I think about it all the time. I'm like, why are we still in a worse? I mean, supposedly, right? Humans are like moving to the future, looking at electric cars, flying cars, trying to get up to Mars and stuff like that, and we still are doing the things that were done, I don't know, 500 years ago, more than that even. I mean, we're still the same, but just using more, even more, maybe potent weapons to do that. And I think I don't know. I always think about that question, and I think one answer to that is maybe just it's economical. Like some people maybe benefit from that and make make money from that. But the other part of it too, I think, is people don't talk enough to each other. I think one of the other things that leads to war, I think, is when you start like labeling the opposite side, right? Like these people are animals, or these people don't know what they're talking about, or I don't know, like you start labeling them as if they're non-humans or other things, and from multiple sides, right? And then that creates more of a tension, where it actually creates the seeds to create a war. And my opinion is, if people sit with each other, uh, I think that probably a lot of the animosity between the people will probably go away, because then you'll figure out these are like the opposite side. They're normal people. They're like me. They have their kids. They have kids. They want them to go to college. They have the same ambitions, the same look or outlook on about their future that I have, and therefore, why are we fighting? And I think I think that's part of the reason, is just people not knowing each other, people just listening to, like we discussed before, listening to the channels or the social media stuff that goes with their thinking, and not potentially listening to the other side. Like you just look at one side and just not listen to the other side. Yeah, it was, right. Yeah, I think it was late 70s. I'm not. Hopefully, I'm not mistaken, but I think it was late 70s. Yeah, right. Carter. Right. 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 I agree. Yeah, David, thank you for inviting me. And I think the next time I will be inviting you to my podcast to tell us your story and how you started HUMET.
Thanks for listening to HUMED with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.